From the California State Senate, this is Senate Spotlight.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Senate Spotlight, where we discuss legislative priorities and policy and other related issues with members of the California State Senate. From the state capitol here in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green, and proud to have back here with us again our state senator from Santa Barbara and Ventura counties, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Hannah-Beth Jackson. Good to see you again.
Always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Brian.
Very glad to have you. And boy, we have like a whole buffet of things we could talk about. I know we don't have a lot of time, but we'll get into it. I guess we can just first start out by saying, wow, 2017. What a whiplash year, huh? I'll let you take it from there.
Well, it's been both an exciting year and a troubling year.
Yes.
Nationally, I would say it's been quite troubling. We've seen an increase in hate crimes. We've seen policies to protect our environment being rolled back. We've seen literally the fox guarding the hen house. We've seen strong evidence of collusion and intervention by one of our most hated enemies over the course of the Cold War, and Russia having had an impact on America's elections. But here in California, we've had a pretty good year. We've been able to confirm and continue our commitment towards addressing global climate change. We passed legislation to improve our housing stock, to improve our transportation systems. I've been very, very proud to work on legislation to bring our policies and our business community into the 21st century, to be able to work and address the challenges that young families in particular have in the work-life balance, and how we move forward with 21st century economic benefits that don't exclude or deny the fact that we have more women in the workforce today, more challenges for California's families, more needs to really accommodate the life experiences and needs of working families, whether it's caring for their little ones, their children, or their parents. In today's world, California is an aging population. Mm-hmm. We're seeing the percentage of people over 55 growing at significant numbers. We're a negative birth rate state, meaning we're aging more than seeing more young people. And then, of course, the whole issue with immigration. California is a state of immigrants. The United States is a nation of immigrants, and in California we've relied very heavily on that immigrant population to do things like to pick our food. Mm-hmm. And in my district, of course, we have a huge agricultural component, and we're seeing a lack of workers to do the work, and our businesses are suffering as a result. And yet we're seeing a policy in Congress and a White House that has vilified rather than acknowledged the benefits that these people are providing and the families that they're trying to raise here, our DACA students in particular. So it's been really an amalgam, never a dull moment.
Yes,
yeah.
You have really encapsulated 2017 in a nutshell right there. And I know you are, as you say, you have been touching on a lot of those issues. I know, and let's just start with current events, if you will.
Sure.
Yesterday, as we speak, you were in Southern California holding another in a series of hearings in your capacity as chair of the Joint Legislative Committee on Emergency Management, dealing with the free speech issues that we are dealing with nationwide, but also here in California, the debate about whether our communities are able to protect public safety during these rallies and protests while preserving the rights of free speech, a very tenuous line. Talk about the hearing and just things that may come out of it going into 2018
Sure.
in terms of legislation and the toxic and very sort of difficult arena that this is.
Well, in my capacity, both as chair of this joint committee, but also as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Right.
You know, the First Amendment is a critical component in our democracy. The right to assemble, the right to free speech, the right of a free press. All of those issues are really being challenged now by the toxicity, if you will, the conflict that's going on, the real division in our country that's frankly, I think, being stoked by a federal leader who, rather than acknowledging and celebrating what unites us, has really been operating on the politics of division. And they've had an impact. They've had an impact here in California. They've had an impact around the country, where the politics of hate have really taken over. And no more obvious place than in the speech and in the behaviors that we're seeing. So back in, I think it was April, when we had that terrible incident in Charlottesville, when a woman was killed and 34 people were injured during a rally by white supremacists who were carrying some extraordinarily hostile and vitriolic and hateful messages. A counter rally took place, and unfortunately, law enforcement did not respond early enough and effectively, and thus there was that violence. But we've been seeing violence. We've seen it here in the Capitol last year when there was a rally and the counter demonstrators came in and they essentially all locked horns and people were injured and stabbed. And so the question for my committee that the pro tem had asked us to address was, how do we deal with the First Amendment? How do we protect the First Amendment while at the same time protecting public safety? That's really the bottom line. How do we allow for speech, whether it's hateful speech, it's still protected by the First Amendment, yet at the same time keeping opposite parties apart from each other so that we don't end up seeing violence take place. So that was the hearing we had yesterday. We talked with law enforcement on its operational aspects. What does it do to assure the right of free speech at a rally, at a demonstration, at a march, while at the same time protecting from the kinds of violence that we see break out? And it was a very interesting hearing because a lot of what our law enforcement is doing is working closely together, doing planning, anticipating what's going to happen, doing some intelligence. There are certain groups we know that are prone to violence, that like to incite violence. Are they going to be participating? If so, is there some way that we can basically control the crowd so that these two groups or three groups don't end up coming in literally, figuratively, and physically locking swords with each other? And it's a process, and while we're never really sure, it was a very interesting hearing talking about things like their intelligence planning, their pre-planning, ways that they can try to keep different groups from carrying sticks and knives and weapons into these events, ways that they can control the crowds. But it's not a perfect science.
Well, when you are not busy working on discussing protecting constitutional rights and safety here in California, you are also authoring some very significant and profound legislation for California in workplace rights, and particularly for California parents who want to take time off to care for a newborn, care for their family off their jobs. The governor this year signed SB 63, the new Parent Leave Act. I know you're very proud of it. California should be very proud of it. But talk about what that means to the average young families that are working here in California.
Well, you know, today's world is a very different world than it was 50 years ago, when we saw more women than not who were home able to care for their families from birth and care for their aging parents. But today we have over 50% of women are in the workforce, and of that number, 70% are either the sole breadwinner, the primary breadwinner, or their incomes are necessary for a family to make ends meet. And so we, as a society, need families to procreate. We need the next generation. How do we balance that? How do we assure that we have a next generation, at the same time assuring that parents are able to care for their children, care particularly for their newborns, and still be assured they're going to have a job to go back to? And we're seeing as well, I think, a big improvement, more and more men wanting to participate in the raising of their children. So we know by all the data that is uncontroverted that the most critical time in a child's early development is from 0 to 3. And we know that those first 12 weeks of life are critically important for a newborn to be able to bond with a parent. We know for women, the ability to spend those first 12 weeks with a child reduces postpartum depression by a third. We know for new dads it creates a lifelong bond, and again, the health and the emotional and physical well-being of a child between 0 to 12 weeks is so critical to be able to be cared for at home. And so this is a bill that will now provide that opportunity for people who work for employers of 20 to 49. Now, if you work for an employer of 50 or more, you are entitled to this benefit of being able to take 12 weeks of job-protected but unpaid leave. And so for small companies and for companies who complain, oh, this is going to put business out of business, actually it's not. All it does is assure that at the end of that 12 weeks, The job will be there for you. It also allows people to be able to access our paid family leave program, which we all pay into. A little bit of that paycheck every month goes into a sequestered account to assure that when parents need to take time off to care for a newborn or for aging parents or something related to the needs that we have as adults to care for children or parents or whatever, can have partially reimbursed salaries. So that they're able to go into this fund for 6 weeks and take out partial reimbursement for their lost wages. So it's a program now that's going to allow up to 2.8 million more Californians the ability to access that financial assistance, as well as be assured that when they come back from that 12 weeks, they're going to have a job there waiting for them.
No, and it's almost as certain as the seasons. You you get the reaction from the Chamber of Commerce, the others, that this is a job killer bill, that it would add more cost that small businesses can ill afford, such as overtime, other employees covering the leave. But I know you kind of inoculated this legislation from those kind of arguments anyway, right?
Well, the fact of the matter is that isn't true. All the data shows, and we did have the support of a national small business organization as well, that had done some studies on this. In fact, for most employers, what they see when they are able to and do grant this 12 weeks for new parents to bond, they see that their employees are more efficient in their work, more productive, and more loyal. Because they acknowledge, realize, and appreciate that their employer recognizes that they are not just people who clock in and clock out and the rest of the time is sort of in the ether, that they have lives, they have families, they have responsibilities, and they appreciate the fact that their employer is trying to accommodate those needs. So we're able to do that. And look, if you look at most of the industrialized world, look at countries like Scandinavia. They give their employees up to a year and a half of fully paid, job-protected leave.
Right.
And those, last I looked, those economies were doing quite well. So it's just a concern trying to change old habits, but we really do need to recognize this is the 21st century. Jobs are different, families are different, and we need to create policies that are going to accommodate those needs.
You know, just a question that just comes to my mind here. I know that you're used to these kind of bills being labeled job killer bills. Do you kind of consider that a compliment nowadays? That you're, when it's called a job killer bill, you're maybe poking the beast in the way you should be?
Well,
perhaps?
Absolutely. I do think that because, significant change doesn't come easily.
Right.
We often are more willing to accept the devil we know than the devil we don't know.
Right.
But these are changes that I feel very strongly are going to, at the end of the day, be received well by both employers and employees. I know a number of companies that have provided this option, and they can't understand why the big battle, because it does make for better employees. It also makes for happier families, less stressful families. That's a key. You come to work, it's very hard to just leave the rest of your life at home. This is one of those policies that I think is really going to be helpful both to employers and to working people and to our youth as they go forward.
That's right, absolutely. Well, from the workplace to the environment, another issue that you've dealt with. I know Santa Barbara is a very sensitive area, the ground zero, if you'll pardon the expression, for oil issues and environmental issues from back into the 60s. The governor signed your SB 44, the Coastal Oil Well Cleanup and Remediation Act, and this is yet another attempt to look out for California's precious coastline and deal with a lot of these orphaned oil wells in California. Tell us about that.
Well, the oil industry doesn't have a very good track record of being good environmental stewards. And even going back, or I should say from the beginning of the oil boom, which actually focused on the coastal areas off of Santa Barbara and an area of Summerlin, which is just south of Santa Barbara, there were hundreds of these wildcat wells that were created both right on the coast and in coastal waters. And frequently when the oil dried up, or they thought the oil dried up, or the company went out of business, they would simply abandon the wells. So back in the 1890s, early 1900s, companies came and left. And when they left, rather than capping the wells to keep oil from spilling, they just literally would either abandon them with nothing, or they'd put tree trunks or rags down the well. and leave. And if you fast forward, and we've discovered many of these wells leaking for years, there's no one to be held accountable. There's no one that we can charge with the cleanup and the repair of those wells. So those are the orphaned, if you will, the abandoned wells that are often 50 to 100 years old. But they are leaking into our waterways, they are impacting our wildlife and our fisheries, and they're impacting the public health of people, whether it's our own community or whether it's visitors who come to our area who want to enjoy our coast, are impacted by the toxicity, whether it's the fumes, which are actually quite toxic, or the crude oil on the beaches or ingested by our fish that we then eat, or breathed in by our people, and particularly our children. This is a bill that's going to take some money that's already required to be used in oil protection, that is a charge to the oil industry, to now specifically identify, there are about 200, we estimate about 200 of these wells, primarily off the coast of Santa Barbara, and start working to remediate them, to cap them properly so that they're not leaking. We're going to start with those wells that are obviously leaking and cap those. It's a $2 million commitment annually for the next 7 years. I'm hoping we can extend it because with 200 wells and the cost associated with that, it's significant money over the course of time to clean up our air, to clean up our water, to clean up our beaches, and to make them healthier so that we can all enjoy the beauty of the area in which we live.
Absolutely. I know we're going a little bit long, but I want to keep you here because there's a lot of issues that I want to get to that I think that I'd be derelict in my duty if I didn't bring up with you.
And I'd be happy to talk about
Well, good. Well, so if we go from coastal protection to workplace protection, if you'll pardon the segue. I know that we're looking here at a very sort of a toxic environment here in the United States and across the world in dealing with sexual harassment issues. And the Me Too campaign is especially impactful all over the country, here at the Capitol, here in Washington, in Hollywood. We've heard all of the stories.
We haven't heard all of the stories.
Well,
We've
yeah.
only heard a small
that's
tip
it.
of the iceberg.
That is the point. It's like, let's talk about what has become a tipping point in so many places here on this globe. And is it actually a tipping point this time around? We've seen so many tipping points on the issues of sexual harassment up to this point. What in particular is the Women's Caucus talking about, and what are you looking for going forward in terms of addressing this next year?
Well, you know, the fact that we just heard not too long ago people here in the Capitol as well as in Washington, D.C. I mean, when the election was happening, we had uncontroverted evidence that the now president, who I call the groper-in-chief, frankly, for his misbehavior, was talking about harassing women, and with great pride and sort of a cocky attitude, which presents sort of a not so subtle support and accommodation and what have you for this kind of behavior. So what I actually did a few months ago is introduce a bill that we'll take up in January, addressing this problem very specifically in the tech world, in Silicon Valley.
Absolutely.
We saw a bunch of women, a couple dozen women, step forward and say, you know, they were entrepreneurs and they were trying to get the funding necessary with these angel investors and investor companies, and instead were being sexually harassed. There's a question, although I do believe that the Unruh Civil Rights Act does address this issue as sexual harassment. I have introduced a bill that's going to specifically identify that relationship, entrepreneur-investor relationship, as one protected against sexual harassment. But yes, this is a problem that has existed, I think, probably since the beginning of time. And I remember very well back in the 90s with Anita Hill. Here's a woman who came forward reluctantly. This was not a political act. This was a woman who came forward very reluctantly to share her experience with a man who was about to be appointed to the United States Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas. And her testimony was riveting and compelling. And yet what happened? He was appointed to the United States Supreme Court. He still sits on the United States Supreme Court. And we have people in the White House who are people who have been known to have conducted themselves this inappropriately. Fast forward, we have here in Sacramento women stepping forward very bravely to discuss their experiences. We have this happening, it's in the education world. We have it happening in Hollywood. We have it happening in Silicon Valley. It happens in sadly, I believe all walks of life. It's a power imbalance. It's about power attempting to marginalize, to subjugate women through the use of one's power over them, whether it's to be able to manipulate a woman's ability to get a job, to stay in a job, to get promoted. This is sexual harassment. And it's my hope that with the internet, with women coming forward, that we're really going to address this problem once and for all and identify what I really believe is the key factor here, and that is that we have to educate men and women that this behavior is not acceptable. And that's part of the problem, is that for far too many men, they see it as a perk of power. They don't appreciate its impact, or they don't care that it has a very adverse impact on the women who are the victims of it. It's a violation. It is something where many women don't feel that they can speak up. We have here with the fellow who is running for the United States Senate, who told women, and I have no doubt, he said to them, I'm the Attorney General of the state of Alabama. Who's going to believe you? Twice removed as the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. My goodness. What is the message that gives to women? The message is that if you accuse someone of someone, you're the one that's going to lose your job. How are women going to be incentivized to step forward? How are men going to be incentivized to change their behavior? I think we have to make it clear that this behavior is not acceptable, that there will be consequences, and that men have to start taking responsibility for their behavior. It's not the women who should be taking responsibility for the men's behavior. It's the men. And part of that comes through education. And this is something
education from the playground, from the home, the dinner table on up. Yes.
And this is legislation that I've been working on for the past several years with the pro tem. We did the Yes Means Yes legislation. We brought it down to the high school level. And then last year, recognizing that, as you say, this starts at the playground. This starts in the sandbox. We've got to educate young people on respectful relationships at the most age-appropriate, in the most age-appropriate way at the earliest possible time. This behavior really has an adverse effect on the workplace, on women's abilities to be successful, thus on our families, and thus on our psyche as a society.
We've talked about this before you come back. You've done so much incredible work on these issues, and we've talked about, here we are, 2016, 2017, 2018, and as we say, we are still legislating and litigating these issues. And a year when a movie like Wonder Woman comes out, and we are ecstatic that there is a positive role model. I know you love that movie, right?
I do, and I love the power, the empowerment it gives to women, and particularly young girls.
So really, this tipping point that we're at here, circa end of 2017, this is necessary, isn't it?
Oh, there's no question about it. We've got to have this discussion. We've got to identify it at all levels of power. This is not a partisan issue. This is Republicans, Democrats, this is men, and there are some women. This is a problem that has existed since probably the beginning of time, but it's one that we have got to correct. And it's my hope that we will do it smartly, that we will do it effectively, that we will come to the table as human beings and work to make this a better world.
Absolutely. Thank you for your humanism and your love and respect and all the work you do. It's nice to see you again.
You as well.
Thank you, Beth.
Got to remember that.
Hannah, okay, yes, come back again, and we'll finish the punchline. Hannah-Beth Jackson has been our guest. She is our senator from the Santa Barbara Ventura County area, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and that is it for this edition of Senate Spotlight. I know we went long, but it was a great conversation. Join us next time around as we discuss important legislative issues and policy with the newsmakers and newsbreakers of the California State Senate. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Senate Spotlight.